Okay, good afternoon, dear friends. Um, we would like first, before we start, to read uh, some of the rules of the video conferencing etiquette. This is just a reminder for all of us. Number one, mute yourself when not speaking. Number two, you can introduce yourself in the chat box with your name and organization or institution, if any, and email address if you want to be in the PhilCuba email directory. Number three, close your video if you observe that your internet connection is too low. This will ensure your presence in the meeting. You can use the same access link if you drop out from the meeting, so technical team could allow you back into the Zoom meeting. Number four, you can write your question or which is at the right-hand side of your screen. Number five, you can also ask questions by raising your hand or calling the attention of the moderator to recognize you. Make your question as brief and concise as possible. Number six, be aware that background noise can be heard. If your microphone is open, try your best not to disturb the meeting. The webinar is being recorded and is live streamed on Facebook Live. Good afternoon again, dear friends. My name is Ana Maria Ronquillo Nemenzo, and I will be your moderator for this afternoon's webinar. I see we're still actually waiting for other participants to come in, but I'd like to acknowledge, and I think we have already greeted them. I would like to acknowledge some friends who I see on the screen. And this is JV Bautista, who is joining us from, I believe, from Nueva Ecija. And of course, we have the ambassador. We're so fortunate that Ambassador Ibete Fernandez is, and of course, she's joining us from Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. We also have Atty. Byron Bocar, and I see here Barbara Fortunato Barbs. I see your name, I don't see your face. We have Alice Raimundo, Jean, Alice Raimundo. We have Jean Justimbaste from Leyte. I can't see others, but I will acknowledge them as we go on. So this afternoon's webinar is being held today because this is an important date for the Cuban people, as well as those who have followed the Cuba politics from the very beginning. The Philippines-Cuba Cultural and Friendship Association of PhilCuba is a solidarity group in the Philippines formed in 2002 that revives the close historical and cultural ties between our two countries and peoples. PhilCuba actively campaigned for the freedom of the Cuban five heroes, and through its various activities, it continues to inform the public on the harmful impacts of the decades-long criminal blockade imposed by the United States against Cuba, and urges efforts to contribute to ending the blockade, which is a campaign that's going on around the world. Today, the 26th of July marks the 67th year since the Moncada Attack in Santiago de Cuba. It was an attack on the 1,000-strong army fort led by Fidel Castro, then a young lawyer and follower of Jose Marti. Along with 159 other courageous Cuban youth. Well, these young people were either students, artists, workers, or young professionals coming from poor, middle class, and rich families who dared to bring down the tyrant Fulgencio Bautista on July 26, 1953. A failed military mission, but it signaled the beginning of the July 26 movement, leading to the triumph of the Cuban Revolution, January 1st, 1959. Our first guest speaker will share with us Moncada's significance and relevance today. Also, one way of expressing solidarity with Cuba's Moncada commemoration is by talking about the ties forged by Cubans and Filipinos during the propaganda movement in Spain. Both the Philippines and Cuba were colonized by Spain at about the same period, and both countries fought against Spain's domination. Our second speaker will talk about extraordinary Cuban-Filipino connection at this time, during that period. So, but before we ask our guest speakers to give their piece, I would like to call on the president of PhilCuba, which is Dr. Francisco Nemenzo, to give a few words. Dr. Nemenzo was founder of the Philippines Cultural Friendship Association in 2002. He was former president of the University of the Philippines and has been a supporter of the Cuban Revolution. Dr. Nemenzo.
Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can understand me because I do not always speak this in the same way as I used to. The Philippine PhilCubas, one of PhilCuba's objectives is to learn more about Cuba, about our relationship between the Philippines and Cuba, and also to learn about lessons from the Cuban Revolution, the experience, Cuba's experience in the building of socialism. Now, I just want to, it's very good that Ferdinand Llanes has already done some work on the correspondence between the Cuban revolutionaries at the end of the 19th century and the Filipino revolutionaries, the Katipuneros. Now, I however want to encourage people to do, we have very limited resources here, but to do a deeper research on why Cuba was able to maintain its socialist revolution even after the collapse of the Soviet Union. What is the difference between Cuba and those East European countries? So, collapse of the Soviet Union shifted to capitalism. And also, let's find out how Cuba was able to detect and abort the internal threats to the revolution, to divert the revolutionary fervor to the way Stalin maneuvered for function in the bureaucracy to seize power in the Soviet Union and did away with the old Bolsheviks, so that the character of the Soviet party changed radically after that. And in Cuba, that's why I hope we'll study this. There have been attempts. There was an attempt in mid-1960s of Aníbal Escalante and his microfaction, who supposed to be Orthodox communist or Stalinist, to try to form to stage a coup against Fidel Castro, and they were discovered, and the plot was crushed, and but at the same time, it did not, Kurds did not run out of control, as in China during the Cultural Revolution. There was another plot in 1980s, led by a major, by a general in the Cuban army. In fact, the commander of the Cuban forces in Angola, who, after returning to Cuba, tried to form a drug syndicate in collaboration with the drug syndicates in Latin America. This would have, if it was not, this was not aborted, we would have seen Cuba fall into the hands of gangsters. So these are the problems that encountered by Cuba in the process of building socialism. And it is very important to study this for our own, as we fight our own struggles here, to prevent the bureaucracy from taking over, to prevent the criminal cartel from seizing power, and working closely with the American imperialism. So that's all.
Thank you, Kadodong, as we fondly call him. Well, to start our webinar, our proper forum, we will call on the first speaker, and the topic is the Moncada Attack and the significance of the Moncada Attack in the continuing Cuban Revolution. So our first speaker is Leima Martinez Freire. She is currently the Asia Pacific Director for the Cuban Institute for Friendship and the Peoples, ICAP for short. She studied English at the Instituto Superior Pedagógico Enrique Jose Varona. She was with our official delegation, Gina and Miel, during the 9th Asia Pacific Regional Conference in Solidarity with Cuba that was held in Nepal in 2019. And currently, of course, she resides in Havana. So welcome, Leima.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I will try without the video so you can listen to me in a better way. I'm trying to do my best because in Havana it's 3:30 a.m. So I will try to stay awake. So my greetings to all of you on behalf of the Asia Pacific Department of the Cuban Institute of Friendship with the People, as you mentioned. I would like to extend my greetings also to Ambassador Yvette, to the Philippine-Cuba Friendship Association, to the President of PhilCuba, Dr. Francisco Nemenzo, and also to Dr. Ferdinand Llanes that are special guests this evening also. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share some of the ideas about the Moncada attack and its significance in the continuing revolution. This 67th anniversary of the assault to Moncada and Carlos Manuel de Céspedes barracks led by Fidel Castro is today celebrated in Cuba and around the world amid the battle to control the pandemic caused by COVID-19. But this year also is a historical moment because the July 26th, it is marked by the demonstrated effectiveness of the socialist system and its health and social programs. Before recalling some of the historical background, I would like to send a solidarity message to all comrades in Philippines and in all the Asia Pacific region that are facing very difficult moments dealing with the pandemic. I know I have read some information about how difficult it has been when no plans or system are implemented to control the disease. Uh, I will divide this presentation into short moments. First, some historical background, and then I would like to expand a little more about all the things that the younger generations in Cuba are doing these days, facing COVID, but also as a symbol of following the legacy of Fidel. I must mention as a historical background that Fidel was in the middle of all the situation of Cuba in 1952 when the coup d'etat was took place March 10 that year, when the bloody repression and an unconstitutional system was put in place in our country with a lot of corruption, poverty, hunger, unemployment. A government led by, at that time, by Fulgencio Batista that was surrendered to the US imperialism following all their orders and impositions. The coup also discredited the traditional parties at the time, making some divisions among them, some indifferences, disorder. And then it is when Fidel, as part of the youth movement of that time, did not hesitate to organize some actions. We must remember, and we will always pay tribute to the more of 20,000 Cubans that lost their lives as part of the repression of the government at that time. Fidel, as you were mentioning during this presentation, he organized a group of young comrades to assault the second largest military fortress in the country. And as a result, we know that as a military action did not succeed, but the objective to get a free country from the tyranny was finally succeeded in 1959. As part of the trial that followed the failure of the attack, Fidel mentioned some of the key elements of the program that will finally guide the revolution till today. He was mentioning all the mistreatment to the Cuban population. At the time, I would like to just mention some of those figures. The 600,000 Cubans were without work at that time. 500,000 farm laborers lived in very low and difficult situations. The 400,000 industrial workers saw their retirement funds lost or taken away. A lot of homes were destroyed by the military rural police at that time, because our farmers did not own their lands. 100,000 of those small farmers who lived and died working in their lands had to pay to their landowners part of the great majority of their production. 30,000 teachers and professors at that time were receiving very bad treatment and very, very low payment. And well, a lot of these difficulties led Fidel and the other comrades to follow the ideals of Jose Marti and the willingness of having an independent Cuba and a developed country. I would like to mention that during the process of the revolution, we have been implementing a program so as to follow this very same program that Fidel spoke through his statement in the trial after he was captured after the 26th of July assault to the Moncada garrison. And that program, it is what we are seeing today among our young people. And I would like to highlight just a few of the tasks that our young people are doing these days. The students in the medical science have been door to door knowing about the health situation of our population. They have also worked on the new technologies with application on our mobile phones so as to research about patients or people that suspect that they have some symptoms. They have also visited the vulnerable people together with the family care system so as to not to leave anybody behind. So those people that are alone or are too elderly to go to do their errands, they have been visited by our young students and comrades. They are also, the students are providing assistance in those isolation centers, those centers that have received positive cases, and they are there paying attention to cleaning the area, doing research. They are also at the labs doing the massive tests to know what are the risk population. They are also now more focused after the phase 1 and phase 2 of the recovery. They are going to the farms to produce more food for the population, as there is a world economic crisis, and we need to import less and to consume more of our national products. And I would like to invite you, because today, invite you to follow our Asia Pacific Solidarity Facebook page, because today a group of young comrades from ICAP will go and do some voluntary work. And as part of the efforts that they have been doing in all this time, they will be recognized by their how brave they have been in facing this COVID and all the support that they have been giving. There, you will see some pictures of these young people doing the voluntary work dedicated to the very first ideas of voluntary work implemented by Che Guevara, but also they will be dedicating the voluntary work to the program of Moncada, that program that Fidel explained, and that it was very clear that the Cuban population needed education for all, healthcare for all, land of our own, houses of our own without having to pay rent. So they will fulfill once more that program that Fidel envisioned. Then we are also during these days coordinating with more friends solidarity actions. And I would like to, before ending my presentation, I would like to thank you, all the Filipino friends that have been sharing their statements, their pronunciations, their social activism, your letters, your messages of solidarity towards Cuba during this moment. And we know that we have counted on your support for many, many years. And as part of the regional meeting that you organized in Filipina, a lot of friends in Asia Pacific have joined to this solidarity movement towards Cuba. So I would like to thank you because I know that you are also living difficult times and you take the time, you take the efforts to organize these kinds of events. Thank you very much, and I will be here for questions or comments. I just wanted to highlight some brief details of Moncada and the support that the young generations are doing for the continuity of the revolution. We are the continuity, and we are demonstrating that there is a socialist system that it works, a socialist system that it's taking care of our population. Thank you again. I think I fulfilling the program with the time you have given me. So I'm here for all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, dear Leima, Martinez. Thank you for that sharing. But for us who have also studied that event, that historic event, the Moncada attack has been a great inspiration. And especially we remember that Fidel Castro, he defended himself, and instead of being cowed by the dictatorship, the hands of the dictatorship, he came out with that wonderful "History will absolve me" speech. It's a beautiful speech that defends, the freedom and rights of people to live an independent life, a sovereignty for one's country. And this has been a continuing inspiration for both countries that have struggled and continue to struggle against foreign influences.
Sure, he was in his self-defense And at the time he arrived to the trial, he was the accused one. But when he started to talk and give the arguments of why they joined the struggle, why they organized the struggle, he became into the accuser, accusing the government and the tyranny of the time, giving the arguments of how much our country was suffering, but also something very humble of him during the trial. It was to recognize all the efforts of the lost comrades that were not killed at the attack or while they were attacking the barracks. They were murdered after the attack. They were murdered without even young people that were not involved in the attack were killed just because the tyranny at the time said that they should be killed. 10 young people out of one of the soldiers that were killed in combat. It was a massacre after that attack, and Fidel during his trial, he remembered all his comrades. And not only his trial, we should remember all the life of Fidel, how much he honored the comrades that were lost in the way to achieve the revolution.
Okay, thank you again, Leima. We are also very fortunate because Marta Rojas led the Cuban delegation, official delegation to Manila. And we learned, was the one who patiently took down notes because there were no stenographers at the time. But all throughout the trial, she took down notes, and so we have a document that now tells us exactly what happened during the trial. So once again, thank you, Leima.
Sure,
and now, but actually, our two countries have historical ties. So this is not something new. We all were both again under Spain and later on the United States. And our historian speaker this time will recall, the wonderful communication between the members of the propaganda movement in Spain, the Filipino propagandists in Spain, and the Cuban revolutionaries at before the turn of the century. So our second speaker is Professor Ferdinand Llanes, who holds a doctorate degree in Philippine studies in the areas of anthropology from the University of the Philippines. He has served as chair of the Department of History at the same university and was the past commissioner of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines and chair of the Philippine Academic Consortium for Latin American Studies. His publications include Tibak Rising, Activism in the Days of Martial Law, which he edited and is a contributing author, as well as the publication UP in the Time of People Power, 1983 to 2005. And currently, he resides in Manila where he teaches. So we have Professor Ferdinand Llanes give his talk now.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Princess Nemenso, and also Dodong. No? It's nice to see Dodong around, and you're getting stronger. Good afternoon to all. Buenas tardes to Ambassador Ibete, and also to my co-speaker, Leima. Your surname, you seem to be connected to Paulo Freire. I just noticed, maybe you are connected, I don't know. You have to tell us. Your presentation was very short, and I am now nervous because my presentation could be longer. And Princess was telling me to make it short. Let's see. I presented this paper in 2015 in a conference in Cuba on the socialist revolution and its antecedentes. It was held in Havana, and when the notice or the invitation was sent, I was at a loss on what to present. And I remembered that the Filipino reformists who were based in Spain in the 1880s up to 1890s, early 1890s, already communicated with Cuban reformists who were also based in Spain. But I never worked on these correspondences until that conference in Cuba in 2015. So perhaps I'll try to go over my paper so that I would not get lost and meander to other topics. No? I'm not really working on this paper as a big project. It just came when as a paper for a conference, but I intend to work further on this to trace the deeper connections up to the contemporary period. Princess sent to me the other day or yesterday somebody who started on finding these connections between Filipino revolutionaries and Cuban revolutionaries. Okay, so the title of my paper is a glimpse of Philippine-Cuban connection during the propaganda movement in Spain. So toward the end of the 1890s, the anti-colonial struggle of Filipino reformists seemed to or tended to become radicalized in Spain. This is not very much known even among scholars because we have always viewed the propagandistas as reformists. But in another paper, I discovered correspondences again among the propagandistas, indicating that as early as the late 1880s and the beginning of the 1890s, they were already radicalized or becoming radicalized and were hinting of going beyond reformism as a course of action to end abuses and Spanish tyranny in the Philippines. This radicalization reflected hints of launching what they called a terror popular, just like the French Revolution. Interestingly, this thinking included references to Cuban revolutionary activities as an inspiration for what they were trying to imagine as a similar Filipino revolt against Spanish tyranny. On April 21, 1892, and you know, the year 1892, it was also the establishment of the Katipunan in the Philippines. But they were not connected. In 1892, Edilberto Evangelista, a Filipino reformist based in Europe, he was studying engineering in France, wrote the leading Filipino reformist, Dr. Jose Rizal. By then, Rizal was already en route to Hong Kong. And he posed this question and suggestion to Dr. Rizal. Originally, this is in Spanish, and I don't know if my translation is good, because my paper in Cuba, of course, was presented in Spanish. No? So, Edilberto Evangelista asked Dr. Rizal, why don't you make an effort to know how many espouse your ideas and are driven by the same spirit? I mean, you have to give some form to your thought. Organizing, in spite of a tyrannical government, a revolutionary club, which you could provide leadership in Hong Kong or elsewhere. Don't the separatists have it in Cuba? I think this was one of the first mention of Cuba as a kind of model, no, for the reformists. Don't the progressives have it in Spain? In short, you are better informed than I am. But I am sure that the only obstacle that you have to overcome in such an undertaking would be the opposition of our old men in the country and the rich who tremble before the idea of seeing themselves threatened in their interest by government retaliation. You know, Edilberto Evangelista would become one of the most able generals of the Philippine Revolution in Spain. He would be killed in Cavite. And he was one of those who thought of, the tactics of digging trenches to defend the towns that the Katipuneros were winning in Cavite. The mention of Cuban separation from Spain was one of the early references of the Cuban anti-colonial struggles by Filipino reformists. It was about the same time that Jose Marti was also organizing the exile community in New York and other cities in the Americas. Events related to the Cuban anti-colonial activities reached Filipino reformists in Spain, not only through reports of Spanish colonial officials and newspapers, but also from Cubans based in Europe. So, you know, the reformists were very much updated. And it was the Cubans who were based in Madrid who were updating the Filipino reformists. The Filipino reformist paper, La Solidaridad, reported various accounts of events in Cuba, apparently gathered from these sources, and published these articles about the colonies in the Americas, written by the reformists or their friends like the Austrian Ferdinand Blumentritt. From these reports, one could get a picture of how the Filipino reformists considered the Cuban revolutionary struggle as an option, and later as a model for their own struggles against Spain. The presence of the Cuban emigre and exile community in Europe and the Americas must have made quite an impact on them. In April 1893, La Solidaridad reported a revolt in Holguin, which grew from a few to about 3,000 men. The report made an effort to understand the revolt. That's Holguin, that's a town in Cuba, and pointed out the failure of the Spanish administration to respond with reforms. And then they also noted the strength of the revolutionary propaganda of the Cuban emigre or reformists who were based in Spain. I'll show you can you see my, can you see this? Yeah. So This is the publication La Solidaridad. And if you notice, they have a full page on the uprising in Cuba, Sublevación en Cuba. No? This is a Spanish, and this is the English translation. This was translated by Dodong knows my colleague, Guadalupe Flores Ganzon. You know, and this is an enormous work. And she translated it all. No? And these are the propagandistas, the Jose Rizal, Marcel del Pilar, and Mariano Ponce. Mariano Ponce, this is also Mariano Ponce and del Pilar became editors of La Solidaridad. This is the letter that I mentioned of Edilberto Evangelista to Rizal, asking him to do something to organize in this something like a revolutionary club, just like in Cuba. Now, wow. I'm sorry. Oh, sorry. Here. So I mentioned that the propagandistas were becoming attentive to news in Cuba. And this is one of those news. You see, the propagandistas reported what the Cubans were also doing in the American continent. So. And they reported on 56 propaganda centers, for example, all throughout the Americas. In New York, the Cubans have 10. In Brooklyn, they have 1. In Tampa, that's Florida, 15. In Jacksonville, has Club Político Cubano. In Boston, it is a Cuba and E. Boringen. In Chicago, they have the Telio Lamar, etc., etc. And then they mentioned that there was a big reunion that was held in January. This was in 1892, 1893, no? Favoring or talking about launching a Cuban Revolution. Now let me continue. That is just an example of what Solidaridad has been doing, no? Oh my God. Paano to? Excuse me, ito pababa mo. Ayan. Sorry. So the pages of La Solidaridad, no, dedicated to the question of colonial reforms in the Philippines, as I said, devoted significant space for the theme of reforms that was also being done in Cuba. In other words, the Filipino reformists saw the common problems and aspirations that joined Filipinas with Cuba and Puerto Rico. The Austrian friend of Dr. Jose Rizal, Ferdinand Llanes, was given much space in Solidaridad to tackle the basic question of maintaining the colonies, Spanish colonies of continental America, providing in-depth critique of the blind policies of Spain with respect to the political rights of the colonial subjects. In one article in 1894, he noted the irony of being born in America, but lacking the rights of being a native of the land. One could see that the reformists were not merely making a passing mention of incidents in Cuba. They further dwelled on the dynamics of colonialism and demands for reforms in Cuban society, such as how Spain administered Cuba. For example, providing a section like Estudios Administrativos, which published legal courses, legal discourses, such as that of the Spanish Gabriel Ricardo España, which discussed how the colonial ministers restricted the powers of the mayors and asserted the freedom of the municipality. So what I'm trying to show here is that the Filipino reformists were really into studying. They were looking into what the Cubans were doing and how probably reforms could be carried out in the Cuban colony and probably also in the Philippines. The increased attention to Cuba during this time was apparently the result of heightened revolutionary activities in Cuba, coinciding with the same period of growing revolutionary unrest in Filipinas and frustrations with the reformist movement. Now, this was in 1893 and 1894. The Katipunan, which was separate from the organization of the reformists, was already underway. So in other words, these were two different groups. The Katipunan was already launching a revolutionary movement, but the propagandistas were still learning the ideas of revolution from the Cubans. A report appeared in Solidaridad at the end of 1894, indicating an attempt for a deeper inquiry of the Cuban experience in the struggle for reforms, this time exploring revolution. It appears that these exchanges established for the Filipino reformists not only much knowledge about Cuba, but also intimate contact with the Cubans in Madrid. In 1895, La Solidaridad published the names of what it described as illustrious Cubans, such as Jose Maria Heredia, a French-educated Cuban who was elected to the French Academy. Emilio Bobadilla, a literary critic, a Cuban literary critic who gained the recognition of the International Society of Artists. In 1895, there appeared in the pages of La Solidaridad a major change in the view of events in Cuba. Mariano Ponce, another leading reformist, published a supposed interview with a Cuban who was not identified. The interview expressed thoughts about the renewal of Cuban revolutionary action for separatism. We grant that Ponce did interview a Cuban, and through this interview, elicited thoughts on the need for revolution in Cuba. Ponce's questions dealt with the meaning of insurrection, the different political parties in Cuba, and the possibilities of actually having Spanish reforms. The Cuban interviewee asserts that insurrection is provoked by Spain through lack of equality, the tyranny, economic tyranny, and the exploitation of Cuba's politics for the benefit of the Peninsulares. Under these conditions, he speaks of the positions of the legal political parties, that of the Asimilista, who receives support from the gold of some and the imbecility of others, and that of the Reformista, who smoothens aspersions and erases old lines. The unidentified Cuban interviewee then points out that the insurrection would have broken out with or without the Reformistas, because there are those who do not cure the ills whatsoever. And these are those who hold firm in their ideals and are not deterred. He adds that it is undeniable that the separatistas have gathered a numerous contingent and appear to be a vindication, a conquest and hope for many. Then the revolution came in 1896, 1898 against Spanish colonialism in the Philippines. The propaganda movement declined and ultimately failed to achieve its goals. Its leaders disbanded and went their own ways. Rizal returned to the Philippines and established La Liga Filipina, but he was later exiled to the south of the Philippines. Marcelo del Pilar became convinced of revolution, but died of tuberculosis in Barcelona. Graciano Lopez likewise thought of revolution and planned to go to Cuba, but also died in Barcelona. A new breed of leaders who were not involved in the propaganda movement in Spain pursued revolutionary action in Manila and sought independence from Spain. Mariano Ponce was briefly imprisoned in Spain and joined the revolution, serving as secretary in the cabinet of Emilio Aguinaldo that was on exile in Hong Kong in 1898. Mariano Ponce documented much about the progress of the revolution. In his Cartas sobre la Revolución, he not only communicated with his fellow revolutionists, but also with the Cubans whom the Filipino reformists met in Spain. At a time when Filipinos and Cubans were both engaged in revolution, the main content of the communication were sharing of experiences in waging the war of independence and the call for solidarity between Filipinos and Cubans. For example, on May 11, 1897, he wrote Jose Izquierdo, a Cuban who was his friend in Ateneo de Madrid, and expressed the needed solidarity between Filipinos and Cubans. I will read part of this letter. Oh my God. I'm not very good at this, you know. Anyway, I'll continue. You know. I will continue. Sorry. Here, I'll read the letter. Do not forget, this is Mariano Ponce writing to Izquierdo. Do not forget that you are our elder brothers, and we, being new and lacking experience in these enormous tasks, we very much need help, advice, and guidance that we could only expect from you. Cuba and Filipinas have traversed the same sad history of humiliating bondage. Together, we must break these chains. We are happy to receive the pamphlets and publications about the revolution that could show us and teach us, above all, and also the official documents, such as the Manifesto of Jose Marti and General Gomez in the beginning of the war. We fervently hope that Cuba continues writing the glorious pages of its history to serve as a lasting lesson to tyrants and as an example to all nations under the yoke of tyranny. I'd like to conclude. In this paper, I try to demonstrate how the Ilustrado reformists of the Philippine propaganda movement looked to Cuba as a reference point for the Filipinos' own anti-colonial struggle. I cited varied accounts and articles, but which I failed to show on my PowerPoint, that show different instances in which Filipino reformists considered Cuba in their thoughts about radical change. They tried to learn from the Cuban situation, imagining the dynamics and prospects of a more radical action against the Spanish colonial power. With the Cuban experience as background, they were also imagining the possibilities of revolution in Filipinas, especially when Spanish repression became even stronger in the last quarter of the 19th century. Of course, as I noted, the decision to actually wage the revolution, the actual revolution was not carried out by the propagandistas. It resulted from the action of a different group of people. But the Cuban experience might have provided both reformists and revolutionists a living example of revolution. As the writings from Solidaridad and Mariano Ponce showed, even if the Ilustrados or the propagandistas wavered on the idea of a revolution, the Cuban revolutionary action still served as a model and inspiration. In 1897, and this is my last paragraph, when a new revolutionary leadership, and this was under Emilio Aguinaldo, decided to establish a provisional revolutionary government, they found an excellent model for a constitution. the 1897 Constitución Provisional de la República Filipina, also known as Constitución de Biak na Bato, was drafted almost exactly based on the Constitución de Himagwayu, the 1895. Perhaps this could demonstrate the depth of how Filipino reformists and later revolutionaries look up to the Cuban Revolution, not only as an inspiration, but as a revolutionary, but as an inspiration for revolutionary action. I conclude with a letter of Mariano Ponce to Don Gonzalo Quezada, who seemed to be the Cuban representative in Washington. And this is a quote. Most esteemed Quezada, Gonzalo Quezada, last year it was an honor to have communicated to you through Dr. Betances and Don Jose Alberto Izquierdo for our patriotic aspirations. I am happy to recall since then, when I served as editor of La Solidaridad and had a wonderful association with Patria, the counterpart, the Cuban counterpart of Solidaridad, of which you were editor. So therefore, Quezada was the editor of Patria. That there already was a deep relation between me and the staff of Patria. This reached a point that I exchanged letters a number of times with the unforgettable Jose Marti. You know, I have to look for these exchanges between Mariano Ponce and Jose Marti. The memories of this past association, the unity of religion and patriotic aspirations, the similarity of our destinies in our respective countries, each one's desire for progress and freedom that Cubans and Filipinos repeatedly articulated, and your renowned kindness. These are the things that moved me to believe that you would not withhold the warmest welcome to a friend who carried this letter, introducing him to a famous fighter for freedom, another Cuban, Tomas Estrada Palma. I greet Don Palma with much enthusiasm and respect. I am now in Japan, where I am glad to be at service as your faithful servant, kissing your hand. On this note, I end my presentation. I hope it's not too long. It was not too long. Thank you.
Very, very interesting, Ferdy. And thank you so much. Actually, listening to that account of the close relations, the relationship between the revolutionaries of Cuba and the Philippines before at the turn of the century. It's so inspiring and it is so exciting. And this is precisely, you know, the close connection we had in the past that we would like to continue to revive and to continue to this day, because we have the same history against foreign domination. Cuba has won its revolution, but continues to defend the revolution against foreign aggression. And the Philippines has still to realize its own revolutionary struggle. But anyway, thank you again for that very exciting account of the early years of the historical ties between between the Philippines and Cuba. And now we are ready to entertain questions from our participants. I want to remind them, though, if they have any questions, to raise their hand so that we can acknowledge you. I'm afraid that we really don't have all the names on your box, but we'll try to see if your name is reflected. So may we have Can we see the gallery again?
Hello, Princess.
Yes. So do we see any hand?
Me.
Oh, Ambassador Ivete. Hi. Okay. So we will entertain 3 questions from the gallery. Okay, starting with Ambassador Ivete.
Okay,
Yes.
Thank you very much and good afternoon. I don't have questions, but just a few comments. Thank you very much, PhilCuba, for organizing this webinar. As usual, you celebrate 26 July and all the important dates for Cubans and for Cuba. Just on Ferdi talk, I just want to highlight that Cuba and the Philippines share a common history, and at some given points we have had the same aspirations. That's why the commonalities in the thinking of the heroes and people that are set to do the revolution or to do things that can contribute to the independence of our countries. And this is something that, as Princess said, is something that we look forward to continue in the future, because in the past we were already attached, and it's normal that that kind of links can continue in the present. Thank you very much for all the history that you brought out for us today. On Leima's presentation, I just want to comment that for Cubans, 26 July is an important, very important day, as you know. 26 July is one of the most beautiful and brave pages in Cuba history for independence. It was the beginning of the armed struggle after trying so many things in order to get our independence. And it was the how can I say, the commitment of the youngest generation to set Cuba free, to continue what our mayors started in the 18th century. Also, I want to quote something that Fidel said in 1973, and I quote, "The Moncada taught us to turn setbacks into victories. Nothing could contain the victorious struggle of our people. It showed us the value of a doctrine, the strength of ideas, and led us the permanent lesson of perseverance and tenacity in righteous purposes." That's why we said in Cuba that always is 26 July. It's always 26, because it's our permanent resilience and commitment to continue the ideas that made Cuba an independent country. That's why we cannot just ignore the necessity of make our socialism more sustainable, and also to share the values of being a socialist country with a revolution that was made with the people and for the people. So 26 July is something that we have always present in our life. Even children that since at the early years in the schools, they are taught, they are teach the significance of this important date, because it set a beginning, another beginning in all the struggle for independence in Cuba. Thank you very much for always remember this important day. And of course, we will continue supporting each other. Thank you very much for the opportunity. And thank you to Leima for being able to be with us today, even it's very early in Cuba. But well,
thank you, Yvette. Thank you.
Yes. So as we started our webinar at 3, that was 3 in the afternoon. It was 3 o'clock in the morning in Cuba. So
Yes, it is now
we have to-
4:20.
So I think we have to rethink our time. Next time we hold a webinar. Okay. So do we have
Yes.
any other?
We have questions coming from Jean, Joshua, and JB.
Okay. So I call on JB. I saw the name first. And then we'll have Joshua and then Jean. Is that Jean Hustimbaste? Okay. JB.
Thank you, Princess. And congratulations, Ambassador, for the anniversary of the Moncada. Cuba continues to inspire many struggles for democracy, socialism, and an egalitarian society. But the last few years, there have been some reverses in the progressive governments of Latin America. I particularly refer to what happened in Bolivia and also in Brazil. And now the government of Maduro, President Maduro in Venezuela is under siege. Can you tell us to any of the resource persons and also to Her Excellency the Ambassador and also to Dr. Nemenso, whoever can answer, the impact of these developments on Cuba?
Yes. Perhaps the ambassador, what has been the effect or impact of the reversal of political developments in
Latin
Venezuela, in Bolivia, in Latin America? What has been the effect on Cuba?
Well, in the case of all the setbacks in the left movement that we have had in Latin America, one of the most that has affected Cuba have been the case of Venezuela, of course, because as you know, they are our brother, our supporter in the region, not only in political terms, but also in economic. And all the blockade that the superpowers are doing against Venezuela has affected Cuba in the supply of many things that we receive from the country. But of course, Cuba continue collaborating with Venezuela and always supporting their cause, because as in our case is there are illegal measures, there are illegal blockades, and there are illegal threats against that country, that the only choice they has to do is to continue to do a revolution, to reverse the situation in the country in order to benefit the majority of the people that were suffering from the past governments that hadn't submitted. Of course, in the case of Brazil and Bolivia, you know that we have sent doctors to those countries, and because all the changes in government and all the threat and discredit against Cuban collaboration has helped to send back those doctors to Cuba, to stop the collaboration in health with those countries, which at the end of the day was something that was not only benefiting Cuba, because as I told you last week, Cuban solidarity is not an exercise to improve our public images. No, Cuban solidarity is because of the values that it has to extend the hands to the people that need it. And it's based on principles, of course. But as you know, sending those doctors back to Cuba not only affect Cuba, but the population that were receiving the services that Cuba were giving to them. But of course, there is things that we cannot intervene because have been the will of the people that has selected governments. In the case of Brazil, for example, in the case of Bolivia, everybody knows that it has been a coup d'etat in order to benefit from the resources that that country has after a very successful history, economic history during the government of Evo Morales. It affected the country, but at the end of the day, still there are forces there in those countries that are fighting in order to go back to the previous government systems that they had. We continue supporting them, and we will be there for them anytime that they need it. The effects, bad effects are there, but it is something, nothing we can do about it, just to continue having, extending the solidarity to them.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yes, Joshua. I heard the name Joshua. I'll see him here. Is Joshua there? Okay. Well, let's call on Jean. Is that Jean Pistembaste? Wang, who were those who wanted
yes,
questions?
Maybe I can just read their questions.
Hello.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's Jean.
Thank you so much. This is the first time that I've heard of Cuba and Philippine solidarity. So thank you for inviting me here. Also, I never heard of Cuba in my elementary, high school, and college history classes. So again, thank you for that. So my question is actually in the chat box, but I will just read it. And this is for Professor Ferdinand
Llanes.
Was there a time in our country's history of Filipino revolutionaries inviting Fidel Castro or Che Guevara, these two gentlemen are very famous in the Philippines, to come to our country, the Philippines? Thank you, Professor.
No, I am not aware of. That's more recent. No, and that would have involved some underground connections, because that's already much later, and the communist movements here were being suppressed. No, so I am not aware of if the revolutionaries here, the more modern revolutionaries, ever invited Che Guevara, and maybe Dodong could answer that question.
Did you say something? Huh? Okay.
I'm not aware that the Philippine government at that time was scared of the Americans. That only to extend an invitation, but Hugo Chavez, Venezuela, was the one who asked to be invited, and he actually came here. And but at that time, his socialist orientation was not yet very clear. In fact, the president at the time, President Estrada, asked me if UP can give him an honorary doctorate. But the that's emphasizing not the social reforms or the or revolutionary idea of Chavez, in the promotion of baseball. So should we give an honorary doctorate? That's all. But I very much regret we rejected that offer of president, instead of the UP, it was UST that gave him an honorary doctorate. And Toto Tomas.
Okay. Well, that was an opportunity lost to have invited either Fidel Castro or Che Guevara, but in those years, in fact, I think the relations between Cuba or the embassy, no, the Cuban embassy was closed down. That was
It was re-established after a jam.
okay. So,
No, the later part of Marcos regime.
Ferdy, did you want to say anything?
No, I'm not aware of any whether on the government side or the radical side. If I doubt if the radical movement here ever invited or ever extended communication with him, much less the government, I think. So I am not no, I'm not.
Well, as Jean pointed out, yes, as Jean pointed out, there is little mention of Philippine-Cuban relations at the turn of the century,
Yes.
at the end of the 19th century. And so there's a lot of learning lost because we don't find that in our historical accounts, and also it is not part of what is taught as Philippine history, and that's what Jean Hustembaste pointed out.
Can I add?
Okay. Okay, Ferdy, yes.
Yeah, that's a good point, Princess, because in fact, it is not only about Cuba. Latin America is historically a dark page in our historical textbooks. And it is only recently that we are trying to revive or to arouse interest in Latin America. That's why in when was that? When we established the Department of Foreign Affairs initiated a move with the universities, and it was Dr. Nemenso was president of UP then, that a consortium of academic institutions were established to arouse interest in the study of Latin America. And you mentioned that when you introduced me, I once became chair of the Philippine Academic Consortium for Latin America. So we don't know much about even Mexico, only now that we are trying to do something about it. A few years ago, we sent some scholars to Mexico. To Cuba, none except for medical studies. But in other areas of interest like history, culture, we don't have much. No, we don't have much. It's only now that we are beginning to look in. Even this topic that I presented, this is new to us. We have never really looked into relations with Cuba. Thank you.
Hello, may I?
Okay.
Princess.
Yes.
May I?
I saw the, first of all, is Joshua still asking a question?
Princess, I'm not going to ask a question.
No, just a minute. I just want to find out about Joshua. If Joshua is not, doesn't have a question,
Yes,
then
yes.
I saw the hand of Miel. So,
I just
Joshua
want
asking
to.
a question?
Yes,
No,
yes, Princess.
Joshua, okay, please, because his name was called earlier. Please ask your question.
My question is, if ever did Jose Rizal meet the likes of Jose Marti from Cuba? If they ever had any contact or communication?
No, I think there was. I think yes, because Rizal went to the U.S. I think, but I don't think that they met. No. They did not meet. No. the only contacts, the real contacts, were in Spain, but not with Jose Marti. And Jose Marti died in 1895, no? 1895, when they launched the revolution. No? They didn't have any, they didn't have any contact.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, that's rather strange, no, and unfortunate, because they both lived at the same time, and yet they never met, but had similar ideas about freedom and independence and liberation. But we had once in PhilCuba, we had a talk given on the ideas of Marti and Jose Rizal, and how their respective ideas shaped the political developments in their respective countries. So that was another exciting talk we had in the past, and perhaps we can reprise that. So for the other people who have not heard that version of the ideas, the political ideas of Jose Rizal and Jose Marti. Okay. Now I can call on Miel. I saw the hand, and was it Byron who also has a question? First, Miel, yes.
I would just like to tell you that in 1990, I'm not very sure if it was in 1995 or 1996, I was still writing for the international paper of Gabriela then, Laya, and we had an affair. I was with Gabriela. We had an occasion when our guest was, she introduced herself as the president of the Federation of Cuban Women. I did not know that she was, I did not introduce herself as the wife of Raul or anyone, but she introduced herself as the president of the Federation of Cuban Women, and she gave us a very inspiring speech, but it was only a small gathering of members of Gabriela.
So she actually came to the Philippines?
Yes, yes. We had a sort of a party. There was even some dancing that was held, and she told us how difficult building Cuba was because of the pressure that was being exerted on them by the United States. And she told us also how fast they move whenever Fidel Castro would call them to action, how fast they would like, people would volunteer to make roads, even if they're not paid, because it's for the country and it's for the building of socialism. So that was in around 1995 or 1996. I remember that.
So to think that could have been Vilma Espin, Miel?
Yeah, she really looked like Vilma Espin, but she did not introduce. Everybody was, like, I was using an alias then. I think everyone was using, almost everyone who attended, or many of those who attended that affair, still used their pseudonyms, including, I guess the guest also used a pseudonym at that time.
Well, you can check the date and then find out if on that year she was still the president of the Cuban Federation of Women. Okay.
I can no longer check it with Gabriela.
Okay. Can we call on Byron? Byron has
yes.
Yes,
Thank you.
Byron.
Thank you, Princess. My question is a comment on the question directed to Professor Ferdinand Llanes. First, he mentioned that, which is true, that we have very little connection and knowledge of Latin America, even if we have a common history of being under colonial rule of Spain. it just occurred to me that next year we will be commemorating 500 years of the arrival of Magellan. Of course, the Catholic Church is very active in commemorating the Christianization of the Philippines. I and others would like to look at it as a colonization. It is 500 years of, we are marking 500 years since Spain colonized us. I think that would be a good opportunity to try to reconnect or connect for the first time with the colonial history and struggles of the Latin American countries as well. That is, I think, an opportunity for next year, not just the Christianization, which in our history became an instrument of colonial rule and oppression. Don't you think so, Professor Llanes?
Yes. No. Actually, commemorating this event is not. We have a different perspectives on this, because the more traditional historians and institutions, of course, would celebrate the circumnavigation, the coming of Christianization, no? But from our end, our historical group and other similar-minded historical groups, we would like to emphasize more what the perspective of the so-called colonized. It's not easy because you have to deal here with finances, budget for conferences, and we can be sure that the state and various states around the world colonized by Spain would be putting much money for programs or projects that would extol the virtues of the coming of Spain and Europe in the Americas and the Philippines. But, right, organizations like our association can do something. For example, especially that Cuba and the Philippines really share a lot in terms of how we were colonized by the same colonizer, or same colonizers,
Nice.
two colonizers. Now, we can, plan activities that could project the perspective of the colonized and what were created after, what was created during the colonization period. Because many times, the perspective really is simply to show how these countries were colonized, but we overlook what was created in the process of colonization. For one thing, the nation was created. Some Spanish scholars, some of them are my friends, would joke or rib me and tell me that, hey, without us, you wouldn't have become a nation. You would have become, separate Cebuanos, Ilocanos, you were disparate tribes and barangays. There was no nation. But I would tell him, no, Spain did not come to build a nation. We built the nation.
Yes.
In the conditions of colonization. So many times that is overlooked in the discourses, in the exchanges. And I think PhilCuba, in coordination with our Cuban counterparts, can probably, look into some projects that would, highlight what the indigenes and what came out as mixed races, produced in the aftermath or even during the process of colonization. That is a good question. That's a good point by Byron Bucar. Thank you.
Yes.
I have a second.
Byron, yes.
Yes, I have a second question still to Professor Ferdi, and it's
Okay.
in the chat box. Could you enlighten us why the United States decided to give independence to Cuba following the Spanish-American War, but decided to keep the Philippines as its colony. And of course, put us on different ways in our post-colonial, post-Spanish colonial history.
Yeah.
How is it again?
Why did the U.S. Grant independence to Cuba after the Spanish-American War, but decided to keep the Philippines as its colony?
Oh, maybe I have to. No, perhaps Beke can answer the Cuban part, and I can answer the Philippine part.
Let me just.
Ambassador.
Yes, let me just put it in the other way. U.S. never give independence to Cuba, never.
Okay.
And it was different because it was Spain, the first colonizer. And then U.S. entered into the war because they had thought of Cuba of being part of America since 17-something already. So as they saw that they were going to lose Cuba, they decided to enter in the war by the main explosion to create how can I say to create an excuse to enter into the conflict. And then since to the Treaty of Paris in 1898, Spain seized Cuba to U.S. And then under the Platt Amendment, that gives to U.S. the right to intervene in Cuba at any moment they decide, they installed a government with a Cuban president but responding to U.S. interest. And then from that started the period of neocolonization in 1899 till 1959, after 70-something years, that Cubans got their independence from U.S. That's why Moncada took place. That's why Granma took place. That's why the Fidel went to the mountains and they go back and expelled the Americans from Cuba. Americans was never there in present, but they were there people that respond to their interests, like Batista, for example. And Cubans, led by Fidel, at the last part of the struggle, they expelled that government replying to U.S. interest. And that's how Cuba became independent. But U.S. never give independence to us. We gain our independence ourselves.
Thank you for that, and apologies to the
not at all.
To the term, but I think the Treaty of Paris, from my point of view, was just the legal vehicle for dealing with the colonies of Spain after Spain was defeated. I think the reality of it was that it was a diktat by the U.S. being the victorious party in the Spanish-American War.
It was the legal meaning. That's what the way for them to take Cuba under their rulership. Because without the Philippines, they cannot.
Because the Philippines was also ceded by Spain to
Puerto Rico and Guam.
Yes. Because the Philippines was also ceded by Spain to the U.S. in the same Treaty of Paris for $20 million.
Yes, they sell it. Yes.
Princess.
Sorry. Let me just add something, not to the question, but to the idea, Byron, that you had before on the colonization commemoration next year. And also agree with you, Byron and Professor Ferdi, that we can organize something together in order to exchange our point of view in that commemoration. Now that we have this new normal, we don't need to travel from one country to another, but just having a simple conversation and simple talk through Zoom or whatever app it is available. I think it would be good to organize a series of talks on the event, so for all of us to enlighten and to see our point of view. I can support the idea to help with the Cuban historians to try to get one or two that can speak to us.
How nice. How nice. Thank you, Ambassador.
Princess.
Isn't really important that Cuba got its independence in 1902?
1902. 1902.
The independence that the U.S. gave to Cuba was a fraud. It was fake. Actually, the U.S. continued to control Cuba through using Cuban politicians as pawns to manage the economy. That's why from the Philippines and Cuba, even during the period of, even after 1902, the two economies were almost similar to each other. We were concentrating on the production of sugar, of tobacco, very similar. And the way Cuba was managed ruled dominated by the United States, very similar to ours. And there were also Filipinos who were collaborators. Even, in Cuba, there were those who continued the revolution, but in the Philippines, the nationalists collaborated with the Americans while pretending to ask for immediate and complete independence. The bunch of Quezon and Oceania were actually telling Americans privately that not to grant independence right away because they wanted to consolidate their power. That was the reason why Santo Evangelista was a member of the Independence Mission to the U.S. He was appointed by Quezon. And then he realized that the other Filipino delegates were telling Americans they were supposed to be there to negotiate immediate and complete independence. But actually, in private, they were telling the Americans to give us that independence right away. Because they were still trying to consolidate the positions. So, in a sense, the histories of Cuba and the Philippines ran along parallel lines until 1959, when our two histories diverged. It was really the socialist character of the Cuban Revolution that made a difference, not that independence of 1902.
So yes, so we have much to do, much work to do ahead of us. Okay.
Princess,
yes,
Gina
yes.
has a question. Gina has a question.
Okay. Gina, yes. Unmute yourself. Unmute
yourself.
Princess, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you now.
Sorry. I removed my good afternoon, Leima. Thank you so much for joining us today. I have a question. Actually, I was thinking with this conversation, it's almost more than 2 decades and a century of friendship, Philippines and Cuba. If I'm a filmmaker, I would have I would have made a movie about the century-old, the ties that bind the friendship of Philippines in Cuba for more than a century. It's very inspiring. It's very actually moving and poignant to know that our Katipuneros or revolutionaries before had a relationship, a deep relationship with Cuba's revolutionaries. Leima, I would like to ask something to Leima. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, in the Philippines, here in Manila, we have a bust of Jose Marti in our national park. Is there anything, would you know of anything in Cuba that is made in behalf or in honor of Philippines and Cuba friendship? That's my number one question. Is there anything that that is erected or made in Cuba that honors both our friendship? And number two, I would like to ask on the behavior of the young people in Cuba. When I say young people or youth, it would be the students or the 18 years old and above, and even the high school students, in terms of their conduct of your fight against the blockade. What are the specific movements of the youth today in Cuba fighting U.S. blockade? Thank you.
Can you see? Okay, well, we have monuments dedicated to Cesar here in Havana. It is a place that we usually pay homage to this independent hero of Philippines. And we also, can you hear me?
Go ahead, please.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, go ahead, Leima.
Okay, I was referring to a monument that we have in Havana dedicated to Jose Rizal. And it is a place that we usually pay homage to this national hero of Philippines. And we usually organize some conferences dedicated to the similarities and between the ideas of Jose Rizal and Jose Marti. Our historians usually organize some set of talks to identify what were those ideals that we share. You were mentioning that Cuba's independence was in 1902. It was just a formality, and Jose Marti enlightened us about the ambitious ideas of the United States, and also Jose Rizal was able to see the interest of the United States to stop the independence of our countries. Recently, I was very moved because amid the pandemic, the Filipino students that are here at ELAM, the Latin American School of Medicine, went to the monument to Jose Rizal to pay a tribute in his anniversary. Unfortunately, we couldn't do any physical activity. Instead, we tried to use the social media to commemorate and to honor Jose Rizal. That is regarding what we do to maintain the links with Filipino. In the case of the young generations of Cuba fighting against the blockade, I must say that it is a daily fight. It is in different fronts. Part of the research and work done during COVID-19, I mean in the research centers, in these moments when we are lacking some medicine, some supplies were not able to get to Cuba, some ships that were supposed to come to Cuba couldn't bring the materials for COVID. One of those ships came into our harbor, and due to the blockade had to return to the country that was sent those supplies, just because the blockade was not allowing the materials to be entering Cuba. And our young people have overcome that situation, creating some new ways of doing the tests of for identifying positive cases in Cuba. Our people, our young generations also have been going to the new centers that were created to fight COVID, so as to be part of the recovery process. And now, as I mentioned, our young generations, our young people are going to the farms to produce food. We know that there are a lot of obstacles to bring some goods to Cuba, and the way we have to fight the blockade, it is to working harder for our own society. But something else that the young people are doing, it is also expressing and demanding the blockade in the social media. There are a lot of blogs and a lot of comments that our young people are doing in the social media. I would like to highlight something that took place 2 days ago. It was a dialogue among the different historians, youth leaders, and other young researchers in highlighting the value of the 26th of July, how we must embrace the spirit of struggle and the spirit of not being not to let the obstacles gain the battle. The same as Fidel taught us during the liberation and independence struggle. These debates among people, among young generation, it is also identifying our own mistakes, to identify what are those things that we need to improve. That is also to make the revolution continue, to identify what are those areas that needs to be updated so as to move forward. So in general terms, the young generations are fighting in the social media, where the campaigns are against Cuba are increasing. Our young generations are also dismantling those campaigns by showing to the world how they are constructing their country, how they are not besides the revolution. They are the revolution, and that is the best example of how we are going to continue with the revolution. And you have seen during the last 2 years how the blockade has been reinforced with more than 80 policies directly aimed at Cuba. And one of those sectors and one of those areas that the imperialism, it is focused, it is in the new generations, trying to show that the socialism hasn't been able to accomplish all the goals of our younger population. And you will see during this month of July and August how the young generations are also participating in the programs dedicated to children, in the programs dedicated to students to have the best experience of after this post-pandemic moment that we are living. I think that it has been demonstrated during this month of COVID-19 in Cuba that at the front battle are the young people with the initiatives that they have had are being implemented. And in that way, the historical leaders are showing to the world that we have a voice in Cuba, that we are part of the construction of the country. I think that that is the best way to fight against the blockade, because while U.S. is trying to isolate us, while U.S. is trying to tighten the economic ways to obtain our supplies, our work, our efforts are going to overcome that situation. So in general terms, that is what we are doing, not to be overwhelmed by the blockade, but to face them every day.
Thank you, Leima. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. PhilCuba continues to join actively in the campaign to end the blockade. Okay. So,
Princess, we have a question from Jean as well.
Okay, another question from Jean Bustambaste.
Thank you very much.
Can we hear?
This question is for
yes.
Leima. Thank you. This question is for Leima. Hi, you see, Leima, I am a member of Women Health Philippines, and I'd like to ask this question curiously. What were the roles of women, Cuban women, in the Cuban Revolution, and the current struggle that your country is facing?
Well, the Cuban, in Cuba, we are already celebrating, because in August 23rd, the Cuban Women Federation is going to be celebrating 60 years of work. And these years are telling you that we have accompanied the revolution since the very beginning. We were part of the group of revolutionaries that accompanied Fidel to Moncada, that accompanied Fidel to Sierra Maestra, that implemented the literacy campaign, that were part of the agrarian reform, because our women were the most affected one before the Trump of the revolution. The great majority of the illiterate people in Cuba were women at that time. The women were supposed to be at home with no health protection. The women before 1959 suffered losing their children without any medical attention. So since the beginning of the revolution, with our beloved Vilma Spin as president of the Cuban Women Federation, all those problems were trying to get a solution. Today, more than 60% of the professionals in Cuba are women. Today, the health or the life expectancy of women in Cuba are above 80 years old. The great majority of professors in Cuba are women. The women today have the right to have 1 year leave, maternity leave, to take care of their children. Today, while we are talking in this time of pandemic, women in Cuba are protected by law, and they are at their houses protecting their children while their schools are closed. So they are receiving 60% of their salary to stay at home and not risking their life or the life of their children. We have to understand also that women in Cuba are the center of the family unit. So they are still having the work in their workplaces, the work at the houses. So that's why the Cuban Women Federation are continuing fighting and struggling and working to improve the quality of life of our women. We have seen in this last year of pandemic how the initiatives have been implemented in our communities to support those women that are single mother or that are taking care of our elderly parents. So in that way, in our communities, women are taking an important role. And we are seeing that also in our parliament, because more than the half of our, around half of the members of our parliament are women. So that means that the policies that we are approving are having the feeling, the essence and the needs of our Cuban women. We are giving to those policies the perspective and the way that should be solved the problems, because as I mentioned, Cuban women are having twice the burden of the family issues. So sometimes we need those policies to reassure that women, violence against women are punished, violence against women are treated and incorporate, not isolate, but incorporate more men to the equal rights for women. And in all this, I think that we are going to get to these 60 years of the Cuban Women Federation with more strength, because we have achieved a lot of policies to protect the Cuban women. Like we have seen how many countries in the world the women have are paid less salaries for the same job they are doing as any other man. And in Cuba, it is respected either in the state enterprises and in the private owned enterprises. Women must be paid same salary for same job. So that is a way to protect the rights of women. And also there are programs in the last years. There has been some programs of maternity, I'm sorry, programs for fertility. I mean, those women that for any reason cannot get pregnant easily. The Cuban government has created some protective programs, so they have the right to go to some to see some specialists so as to undergo into a process of pregnancy, either in Cuba or abroad, because there are some programs that are not able to be done here in Cuba, and the Cuban government has paid and has supported some other Cuban to go abroad and receive treatment. The same for the children. I mean, the most precious thing for a mother, it is their children. And if those children are having a difficult disease, it is respected their salary so as to allow the mother to stay together with the children in the hospital with full salary so as to protect her. Again, here in Cuba, or if the treatment must be abroad. So these are just some examples of how Cuban women have gained an important role in our society. Now, there are a lot of farmers that are women, and they are they have the commitment to produce more goods, more food, so as to bring to the table of the Cubans more of the things that we need.
Just to add a small thing to the very comprehensive explanation that Leima did, is that Cuban women has won a place in the history of Cuba, because not only in the last part of our revolution, but before, when Cuba was fighting against Spain, there were a lot of women that joined their men in the field in order to support the independence war, working with them in the campaign hospitals, but also giving their children to fight against Spain and do whatever was possible in order to support the Cubans that were fighting against Spain. So it is a tradition that we have had since the very beginning of our struggle for independence.
Thank you, Beth.
Yes, thank you, Jean, for that question. But we'd like you to know, and also the rest of the participants, that in fact, we are, PhilCuba has been planning to have a webinar to precisely discuss, the role of women in Cuban society, in revolution and Cuban society. Okay, wait for that. Wait for the announcements later. We've extended actually more than about 15 minutes beyond that time. But if there are no, and I beg your indulgence if we can have a few more minutes. But if there are no more questions from the gallery and from other participants, so okay, then we'll end this webinar and call on our coordinator of PhilCuba, Gina De La Cruz, to come up and probably give us some further announcements. Gina?
Yes, good afternoon once again. Our dear Leima, thank you so much. We were together, Leima, myself, and Niel. We're all together in Nepal last year. We were so amazed by the kind of united Cuba presentation, all the things that you've done. I was actually particularly happy when I saw Fernando Gonzalez, because when I was younger, we were part of the Free the Cuban 5 Heroes campaign, and I was telling myself, oh my God, we won, and he's here. And also the daughter of Che Guevara was there, and we were so happy. We reported everything to the PhilCuba in time for remembering the birthday of Fidel Castro. I would like to thank you, Leima, for sharing with us your thoughts and your sense on the Moncada significance until today, and your discussion of women is so amazing. We would like to have you back when we discuss and continue these conversations on Cuba on different subject matters. Thank you so much, Dr. Ferdinand Llanes, for your very poignant presentation and those pictures of Rizal and the Katipuneros of the Filipino Katipuneros having conversations or exchanging letters with Cuban martyrs or Cuban Katipuneros also, or revolutionaries. We would like also to thank the ambassador, Her Excellency Ambassador Ibete Fernandez Hernandez, for joining us again. She was with us last week for the Cuba COVID or the discussion of the discussion on the international medical health brigades that's being done by Cuba all over the world. To date, more than 60 countries, and that nomination for the Nobel Prize for the Cuban International Health Brigade. Thank you so much for all the participants who's here with us to this afternoon. We are just so happy to be with you, and even in this situation, we are still exchanging notes, exchanging solidarities for Cuba. And I would like also to announce Cora Fabros, our host, our webinar host, said don't forget to tell them that we're planning actually to go to Cuba probably before it was planned in 2021. October 2021, but we're thinking maybe in better times, probably in 2022, to be part of the May or November Brigade, to go to Cuba actually, so that in our own eyes, in our own experience, perceptions, we can experience Cuba. So that would be it. I think there's no more what we call this. There's not any more. There's nothing more to say. But just lots of thanks.
We have a photo,
also
group
to
photo,
Princess.
before we all go.
Yeah. Thank you also to Princess for moderating and keeping up with this platform Zoom. May we request everyone for a photo op?
May we ask our host, Tita Cora, to take that photo. Thank you.
We have fewer guests this time because they are.
Who's getting the photo, Weng?
Our host, Tita Cora, is taking the photo.
May I request everyone to please turn on your videos so that we can see all your faces. And then let's all smile.
Ayaw magpakita ng iba.
Okay na. Okay na ba? Leima, is your video on?
It's okay now. She's taken the photo. Thank you all.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leima.
Leima, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Leima and Professor
Ferdy.
May I say something before you leave?
Yes, Leima. Yes, please.
Yes.
I just want to say.
Leima, by the way, Ferdy,
Yes.
Professor Ferdy read a comment that said, "Would you be related to Paulo Freire?"
No, no. I don't think so. No. No, I just want to mention that this year ICAP is going to celebrate 60 years this December, and we will be celebrating in the different way as we planned, but we will be celebrating during this year and also next year. So we invite you to share your personal stories, to share pictures of you in Cuba, pictures of the solidarity activities that you have been doing during all these years of solidarity. You are part of ICAP, you are the history of ICAP, so we invite you to share your stories and your ideas.
All our photos.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you once again.
Thank you, Leima. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Everyone wave.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Salamat po.
Ciao. Bye.
See you again in August.
Ciao,
Thank
Ibe.
you.
Saludos.
Ciao,
Saludos.
niña. Nos vemos. Ciao.
Okay, thank you. Hasta la Victoria, syempre. Kadodong, are you still there? Princess, congratulations! Nasaan si Princess?
Leima still here.
Leima. Leima, thank you again. So you should sleep now.